What is up, addicts? Welcome to the Fantasy Addiction Network. In this video, we are taking a look at Jared Goff, quarterback for the Los Angeles Rams, and giving you guys an insight into how we feel he's going to finish 2020. We'll begin by looking at where he finished last year. 4,600 passing yards, tied with Jameis Winston for the most passing attempts, 626. Finished with only 22 passing touchdowns and 16 interceptions, so definitely disappointing in the touchdown-to-interception ratio last year. Only 40 rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns on the season. Finished with 263.5 fantasy points, which was 13th most, but 16.5 fantasy points per game. Now, for those of you that owned Goff, you were probably pretty excited at the beginning of the year, and it took a very, very sharp turn southwards about the middle of the season, and then he honestly finished on a pretty good note. So last year, starting the season out with a poor game against Carolina, but then putting up multiple quarterback 1 weeks between weeks 2 and 5. Terrible game against San Francisco. 2 more good games in the middle, and then 3 straight back-to-back terrible games. And granted, he played against tough defenses, but last year was pretty much a tale of 2 Goffs. If he played against a really tough defense, you could expect him to completely crater. Whereas if he played against a average to mediocre defense, he did pretty good. So the epitome of a streaming quarterback is what you saw in Jared Goff last year. And this really shows the story of why waiting on quarterback and just playing the waiver wire and playing the stream typically tends to be the optimal strategy in most leagues that only start one quarterback. Because had you gone into your season expecting to start Jared Goff every single week, look at the weeks that he would have absolutely trashed your team. You typically can't win if your quarterback is only putting up 5 points. So that's a huge, huge drop off from the expectation of what a top 12 quarterback is going to do for you. But had you had Goff and you were streaming other quarterbacks, you're like, notice when he was playing the route of the Steelers, the Bears, and the Ravens, you could have picked up someone else and streamed better matchups in those weeks and then come right back to the well when he played Arizona, Seattle, Dallas, San Francisco, Arizona towards the end of the year. Obviously, San Francisco was a bit more injured by week 16. So playing the quarterback streaming game is a effective strategy that we'll talk more about later in the year, but this really just illustrates why you should never expect to start a quarterback that you draft every single week, and it's why we typically don't recommend taking a quarterback early on, because you'll become more incentivized to never bench them, even though every quarterback is susceptible to a bad game. But you can't rationalize benching a guy like Patrick Mahomes, whereas you can rationalize benching a guy like Jared Goff. That being said, there's a little more to this story than simply looking at the production. The team did have a philosophical change in the way that they were playing. So towards the end of the season, right around that week 10 to 12 time frame, the team started to switch over from playing more 11 personnel to playing more 12 personnel, bringing a second tight end onto the field, which started to free Goff up and give him a little bit more time. Offensive line was really bad last year, and it's not any better this year. They didn't make any drastic improvements whatsoever. So I think it would be pretty reasonable to assume that this team is going to go into the season expecting to run more 12 personnel. It wouldn't make sense for them to just expect their offensive line to perform exceptionally better if they haven't made any improvements to it whatsoever. But that could just be me assuming rational coaching here. And I do think that Sean McVay is a rational coach, and we saw the success that their offense had when they switched to 12 personnel. So we're basically building this up for some of our other conversations with Cooper Kupp and Tyler Higbee. But my personal view on it is, why would they go back to something that clearly failed them and wasn't working for a good portion of that beginning part of the season? Jared Goff was just all over the place, and then he finishes the year out very consistent, averaging between 80 and 100 quarterback rating after coming off 3 games south of 70. It was a good sign of how this offense can continue to improve even with a less than stellar offensive line. So where did he finish with some of the metrics last year? As we already mentioned, he finished with the most pass attempts, even though he saw a downgrade to his total passing yards from 2018. So a much less efficient year in 2019. Finished with only a 68.6% clean pocket completion percentage, a 32.3% pressured completion percentage, which was 24th in the league, and a 29.6% deep ball completion percentage. So Jared Goff was not very accurate last year in his passes, and that definitely came through in some of the efficiency metrics. We saw him drop, a whole 10% in his deep ball completion percentage from 2018. I mean, part of that could be Brandon Cooks dealing with injuries most of last year as well, but a lot of it is on Jared Goff and this offensive line. Finished with 6.7 adjusted yards per attempt, which was pretty average, but it dropped a 1.3 yards from 2018. I finished with a 7.0 accuracy rating, which was 20th, and he almost led the league again in danger plays with 48, so plays that could have easily turned into a turnover. Finished with a 3.5% touchdown rate, which I think it's pretty reasonable to expect that to regress up a little bit more after finishing with 5.7% in 2018. And while he was playing really good in 2018, he wasn't MVP caliber by any means or any stretch of the imagination. So it's going to be an interesting season with some of the personnel changes. So obviously Todd Gurley moving on and then replacing him with Cam Akers is going to change things a bit, and then letting Brandon Cooks go. And they did draft Van Jefferson in the draft, but I don't really foresee him being too involved in this offense right away. So you're going to see a tandem of guys like Josh Reynolds and Tyler Higbee and Gerald Everett seeing an uptick in their targets this year to make up for the targets that Brandon Cooks is giving up. And that's all the more reason why I also do feel with Brandon Cooks gone and not really a caliber of receiver replacing him, it makes much more sense for them to continue playing more 12 personnel. And I think this will actually bode well for Jared Goff, giving him a little bit more time and a little bit more ability to move around in the pocket. Having that second tight end will at least cover up some of the blemishes of this offensive line's inability to protect Goff. Now, will Goff be able to rebound without Brandon Cooks out there? I mean, again, we saw last year he finished the back half of the season doing pretty well, where Brandon Cooks was pretty much doing nothing or was out for a portion of that time. So not as worried about Jared Goff, especially because you can get him in the double-digit rounds. Again, not someone that you're planning on starting every single week, but I do think we see a positive regression in this touchdown rate. We have him finishing with 4,500 passing yards, 28 passing touchdowns, and 16 interceptions. Same rushing production essentially as he did last year, with 62 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns. That would put him at 275.2 fantasy points. I don't really see him performing too much above this, but he does give you a lot of upside considering how bad this defense could be. And the division that the Rams play in is just getting better all around them. Except for maybe the Seahawks haven't really made any marginal improvements. I feel like the 49ers are arguably just as good on their roster as they were last year. The Cardinals took a few massive steps forward. So this could be a division where the Rams are going to have to score a lot of points in order to keep up. We know that their defense is looking to be a bit below where they were last year. Moving on from Wade Phillips, lost a few key pieces on defense as well. So it could be a tale of a similar story that we can tell with like the Dallas Cowboys and Carolina Panthers, where their defense ends up underperforming and the offense by nature has to keep up with the other team. So there could be some pretty gross games because of that, because I don't really know how Jared Goff is going to fare if he's constantly having to come back, but we have seen him playing some clutch moments in the past as well. So as long as Sean McVay can continue to work his magic, I think Jared Goff could actually be a really productive fantasy quarterback this year, and could actually outperform his expectations, especially if this offense has to put the weight of the game on their shoulders more often than not, if this defense ends up being a bit worse than we've seen in the past couple years. So that is my take on Jared Goff. We're going to use that analysis and bring it forward into how we expect the weapons around him to perform as well. So stick around for that. Hit the subscribe button for more content like this one. Hit us up in the comment section with any questions or thoughts about Jared Goff, and we'll see you guys in the next video.